I'm Heather Crawford and welcome to my Tuesday in the Garden. We've been here at the Summerhill Farm for 20 years now, and we've been doing a lot of stuff, doing it organically, and since I'm also the chair of the Conservation Commission, I have been very busy trying to control a whole bunch of stuff that I find growing in my yard that are called invasive plants. Now, there's a difference between an invasive plant and a weed. A weed is a plant that's growing where you don't want it. It can be a native plant, it can be a perfectly happy garden plant, it's just growing where you don't want it. An invasive plant is one that's come from somewhere else on the planet. It's been brought in for any number of reasons, whether it's pretty or it's good to eat or it's a good deterrent for pests or something like that. But it's been brought in and it said, I am perfectly happy here. And I do not care if I grow and I can grow over the native plants and I don't provide the same food supply for them that they do, or I change the habit landscape, or they do bad things. Usually they grow a lot faster than the native plants, and that tends to be one of the problems. This little patch over here is where I'm going to start talking about invasives today, because I've ignored this for 2, maybe 3 growing seasons, and as you can see, the plants are taking their toll on me. Now, in here we have sort of the top, several of the top 10 most invasive plants. And many of them these days we are finding are vines, because part of the whole climate instability is that we've been increasing our carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, and it turns out that vines use carbon dioxide more efficiently than many other types of plants, and so it allows them to grow much faster. Which is why this is actually becoming the age of the vine almost when we're looking at landscape management. So let's stop there. Okay, so the other thing about invasive plants is there are some that are, people that work in the invasive species thing they talk about plants in different ways. One of them is there's the creepers versus the leapers. And the creepers are plants like vinca or pachysandra, or any of the plants that grow, or daffodils, any of the plants that you plant them and they grow out in big circles, and they can end up taking over the entire landscape. I have a old road in the back of my house that is completely covered with pachysandra because it was planted along the edges and then the road was abandoned, and the pachysandra has said, hey, we love this here. But it won't go any place out of that circle. So if you see some in the middle of the woods, it's not that it's gotten there by itself, it's that at some point there may have been a homestead or something and it was planted there. The other grouping is then the leapers, and those are the ones that spread by roots breaking off or by seeds being carried by birds or animals or those things. And so you can find them in the middle of the woods, away from places, and those are the ones that are a really big problem. And a couple of those groupings are in my vine collection right here. One of them is the Oriental Bittersweet. And this is a young plant. As I say, that it's about 2-3 years since I last dug it here, but it is a vine. It is very aggressive, and it grows up and it strangles the plants. It's the one with the beautiful orange and yellow seeds in the fall. And when I was, 50 years ago when I was a kid, we used to drive to New Jersey from Connecticut for Thanksgivings, and there was this one spot on the New York border where my mother used to make my dad pull the car over so she could collect these gorgeous berries to decorate the table for Thanksgiving. 50 years later, we're now like, oh my God, we cannot get rid of this stuff. So it spreads by seeds, the birds love it. As it gets a little bigger, it gets these polka dots on the stems here. And when it gets really big, it actually gets almost like a diamond scale shape in it. It's really pretty, maybe a little unfortunately, but it climbs up the trees and it wraps around them, and it actually ends up strangling the trees and killing them, which is why it is a bad plant. Okay, the second one that we have growing in here, which is a little harder to pull out for you because it has really big spikes, is the multiflora rose. And this is a plant that was brought in. A lot of these things were brought in because they were pretty, or because they were like, oh well, it'll be good erosion control because it grows fast and things won't eat it. But it's growing right now. It gets little white flowers, and then it gets these groups of berries, and last time I checked, yes, over here are some of last year's berries. So you can see the big clusters, and they are the birds actually really like them. This cluster is the only one left in the yard, I think, but they like to eat them in the winter after they've frozen. But they are then spread them out, and you'll find or if fields get abandoned at farms or they don't get mowed for a couple of years, this is what will spring up in great abandon. Let's see, what else have I got in here? If we move just around the corner here, we have a paradox, which is a plant which is very invasive but has very delicious fruit. So it's clearly brought in for its deliciousness. See, this is guy right here, which is called the wineberry. Again, it's got pretty, you can see the entire stem is covered with these bright red bristles, in amongst which there are some pretty sharp thorns. And it grows and it comes over and it does what it does slowly. I tried to pull this one and I can't because it goes down and it roots itself on the other end, so you end up with these large loops. As I say, it's delicious, but it's a really bad grower, and this is an area I had cleaned out completely 2 years ago because I'm like, I will have 6 plants of this and I will get the berries and I will take good care of it. And last summer I didn't get around to touching it, and this is what I've got now. So some politician at some point said that eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. And he was talking about, politics, but it's really true for invasive plants as well. And so what I try to do at this time of year is find all the cut down the big ones, and then find all of the little ones and get rid of them. The big ones, especially with things like bittersweet where it's wrapped up into a tree, you don't want to pull it because you'll hurt the tree more than you'll destroy the thing. So you just cut it low down as high up as you can, and then you can, the rest of it will rot out and break out and fall out of the tree eventually. But for the little guys that have sprung up from the last year or so, this is the time of year I like to come out and just pull them. And, sorry. You can tell if you've got a bittersweet plant or not because bittersweet have bright orange roots. I find a lot of the invasive plants that I'm concerned about do have very brightly colored roots. It's very interesting that way. So, but this time of year you can just come out and pull, and then I find a piece of farm equipment or a rock or something like that, and I put them upside down on it until the roots dry off completely. Because there are several of these invasives where if you pull them up and then just drop them on the ground, they will happily just re-root. Okay, so this plant here is one of our invasive species that, quite frankly, at the moment I can't remember the name. I will put it on. But it's got this very fuzzy stem. It gets these things. It spreads quite rapidly, and it grows in all sorts of places. If the leaves aren't enough of an identification as you want, it also has bright orange yellow roots, and if you break it, the sap is neon yellow. So this one, that's why I put the gloves on before I dug it up, because it actually can stain your skin. But this is one, it's very easy to find and remove, but you do want to do it before it goes to flower. This one happens to be setting buds already, so I'm coming in at a good time. See, there's the buds. It gets a bright yellow, almost buttercup looking flower. It's really attractive, but like I say, the seeds are actually spread by ants, and it pulls up really easily. And then it grows all sorts of places that you really don't want it to end up. Okay, let's see. Nope, that's the jewelweed. That's the good stuff. Anything else in here that I can... Okay, so vinca, a lot of people are like, they've got it planted and then they're trying to get rid of it. It's very, very, very hard to get rid of. Best thing I can recommend, if you've got an area that you're trying to get rid of that you don't have anything else growing in is to come in, mow it down as short as you can, and cover it with 6 layers of newspaper and some mulch, and try and smother it that way. And you'll need to leave it that way for a couple of years till the roots die off. But once it gets into your environment, it just grows. And then the problem also is that it, as I said, it will transplant itself if you move dirt that has vinca roots in it. It has to be moved by humans, so it's not what we call truly invasive, but it does end up in places that you don't want it to, and once it gets there, it's very hard to get rid of. Over here, I've just got a little bonus thing for you because it's all got the thing. This is an area where I have another one of my questionable plants. It is a blackberry. It is a native species, but native species can be just as invasive or take over as the invasive species. So those are our pests or nuisance species. So this started as a nice little square here, and this theirs, and then all that moved all the way over here, and this whole area here was also filled with blackberry bushes and bittersweet. So we got a new roof gutter from the barn. And since I was digging this area out, I decided I was going to get the invasive plants out. I decided that I was going to turn it into a little infiltration area. So you can see I've dug down. You only need to go down 6 or 8 inches. The soil that I scraped out, I have made a little berm. I'm pulling, as I'm scraping it, I'm pulling all the rocks out, tossing them in to make an area where there's a splash pad for where the water's coming out. And I'm going to put a little mulch in here just so the stuff doesn't grow back in. It needs to be a hard mulch because if we get a really pounding rainstorm and you use something like grass clippings or straw or leaves, the water will just pick it up and wash it over the edge. Because this is designed to catch, like a half-inch rainstorm. But it is eventually going to keep the water from going down my driveway, out to the road, and then down to the Hammonasset River. So that's my part for infiltrating the water. And removing invasives, taking advantage of the opportunity of having the bare soil there. Okay. The other things I want to talk about is that people think are good plants versus what people think are bad plants. Now, lots of people want a perfect lawn, and they don't want dandelions growing in it. They hate dandelions. I love dandelions. They may not have been a native, but they only grow in manicured areas because they'd have to take advantage of that. You don't find them taking over places in the wild. So they're a weed, but they've got a deep tap root that brings nutrients up to the surface, which helps your grass. They have the flowers early in the spring, which are critical for pollinators, and they're edible. You can make salad with the greens early in the year, and my grandfather used to make a killer dandelion wine with the flowers. Unfortunately, that recipe has died with him. So dandelions are a bright yellow, early sign of spring that I think is great and most people hate. On the other hand, over here, we have what is now my personal plant from hell. And I'm sorry to say that, but about 15 years ago, we had one of these plants show up in our yard under an apple tree, and I said, oh, I have marsh marigold growing. I knew it was a wet spot. Well, isn't that interesting? Then it started showing up in my gardens. Then it started showing up under my trees. Then it started showing up, and this entire garden plot over here, until Eric plowed it a couple of weeks ago, was an entire field of this plant, which is a ranunculus, or also known as false marsh marigold. And it is an invasive, and it comes in and it will fill in entire areas. And the reason it is so bad is because you can't just, dig it up and throw it away. If you pull up a plant, and it's not just producing growing by seeds. If you pull up a plant, you can see it's got all these little potato-like things that are called corms in the root systems. And so every single one of those will become a new plant. And so you can dig this up, but if you move the soil that's has this stuff in it, you will end up with this stuff all over the place. It's been spread by plowing here, it's been spread, and there is no way to get rid of it once it is in the soil because the corms will stay for years. Do not plant this plant, as pretty as it is. Also growing back in here in the shade, hiding from me, is another one of our spring plants that was brought over originally as what they call a pot herb. In other words, it was something that people would eat. And this is garlic mustard. It is edible. It literally tastes and smells like garlic. It's a biennial, and it puts up this lovely white flower stalk, which that is not it, that's a different one. But you can see back in here, as I crawl under the bush, the flower heads are starting. And you'll see this all along the side of the road right about now. I just broke that, and I can smell the garlic from here. This is one that spreads by seeds. It's a biennial. It's just a little rosette of, looks like a violet plant the first year, and the second year goes up, and then the ants take the seeds and carry them off and spread them all over. So this is one, if you want to pull it up now, you can take it and boil it and add it to soups and salads and pestos and all sorts of good things. But it's really important to get it before it goes from flower to setting seeds. And it's also very easy to pull. It has a very shallow root system. So when I have a day, I use, a lot of times I will just say, okay, today is garlic mustard removal day. And I go around my yard and pull it all. Since I've got the gloves on, if I've got the gloves on, I will also pull the lesser celandine, which is my friend with the yellow sap. And if I'm not using them, I will take them all. You take all the plants, put them in a black plastic bag, and let them sit in the sun for a couple of weeks so that they are completely killed before you then find the invasive compost pile that you can monitor or slip them into your trash. Because technically it's illegal to dispose of garden waste in the trash cycle, but when you're talking about invasives, there's no good place to send them other than the incinerator. Stop. Some friends that are coming out with me for this next segment. If you happen to have enough property or find the person who can rent you a goat, goats are really good at controlling invasives. We've had these 3 fine young men since October, and this entire area back in here was an invasive nightmare. So Eric fenced it in. This is our initial goat yard, and over the winter they have eaten everything back to nubs. Now that spring has come, I let them out in the yard with me when I am walking around, and they often, they're eating many of the invasives out. Snowy loves, unfortunately, also crocus and lilac, so they can only come out when I am with them. But when they're hungry, they're eating the dandelion heads, they're eating the multiflora rose, they're eating the bittersweet, they're eating everything. But they don't stay in one place, they are browsers, so they can only come out when I am with them. So we're going to go up over into here where I have my collection of baby invasive species so that we can see some of the other ones that are coming into the yard. Coming into this field here, which gets mowed once a year because we have a lovely goldenrod patch and milkweed, and so we only want to mow it once a year. But there we go. They're eating all the leaves off it. You're a good boy. Yes, you are. Here's another example of something that people brought in for landscaping purposes, but you can see the English ivy crawling up my tree here. People think ivy is lovely and it makes the buildings look like you're in England, and it comes up, and we have it on this tree here because I haven't gotten to it, but over here in the old road bed you can see where it's actually covering the trees. It's very bad for the trees. It causes the bark to rot, which allows the insects to get in, and so it's a real problem. This whole area here is my friend the multiflora rose, but in the back, which I'm going to put on bigger gloves for, is the Japanese barberry, which is in the top 10 of the invasives. People used to deliberately chose it to plant under windows because the thorns would be deterrents to people climbing into the house. and it has cute flowers in the spring, and it gets bright red berries the whole length of the stem, just like the flowers in the fall. And again, the birds like to eat them, and then they take them and they poop them out in the woods. And barberry is an incredibly resilient plant. Researchers at the University of Connecticut found that it will grow and set seeds in 1% ambient light. So basically you can put it in the back of a cave and it will still reproduce, which means that it grows perfectly well as an understory throughout the woodlands in Connecticut, and will grow and reproduce and spread out. And there are actually, if you go out in the woods at this time of year, there are strips where it's just brilliant green and it's all barberry. And I'm actually going to get my shovel. Should have grabbed that when I grabbed my glove. And again, you know, I haven't been out this section in a couple of years, and this is how big this plant got. If it was any bigger, I would just be cutting it. But I want to be able to show you the roots. Now this is another plant with that bright yellow sap and yellow root structure. So if you pull the branches off, it's also bright yellow on the inside. So it's very easy to identify. It's got the small leaves, the cloudflower clusters, which will turn into green berries, which will then turn into red berries, and it's growing like crazy. This is the last week of April, and this plant is already in flower, and it's going to start setting seeds within a couple of weeks. So this is a pull early, pull often, cut it down to the ground to at least put stress on it, and then cut it as many times as you can while it regrows. And this is one in particular that if you're in the woods and you see little ones, and there was a couple around here, so you can pull, okay, right over here in back of my wonderful camera person, we have a little one, so I can just pull it out. I can see the yellow root, but if I were to just leave this one on the ground, it would root itself back in. In the invasive plant group, there was a woman who volunteered at a wildlife sanctuary, and she went out and she cleared an entire acre of barberry by pulling it and dropping it on the ground. She's like, and I felt so good. She said, and I went back 3 weeks later and it was all still growing. So you don't want that to happen. If you're going to put the work in, make sure the plant actually dies. Okay, so what else have I got growing over here? Oh, well, here is the garlic mustard in bloom. So those lovely little four-petaled flowers tell you it's in the mustard family. You can see the almost violet-shaped leaf and the little purple stem there. Like I say, it pulls really easily, and if you collect enough of it, you can pestoize it without even having to add garlic. Okay. Here, sneaking into my underbrush, is one of the other top 10 invasive species, the winged euonymus, also known as burning bush. It's called winged because you can see on the stem here these brown or gray, they actually stick out and make wings off of the stems, so it's very identifiable that way. Then it's got this bright red little, where the leaves are coming in. It gets lots of little flowers which smell very sweet in a couple of weeks, and it then gets more of those red berries which are so popular with the birds. It grows rapidly, and I have a former neighbor who used to be very proud to tell us that she brought the euonymus back from Cape Cod and brought it into the neighborhood. But it will grow off of the roots, it will grow from seeds, and it will grow so thickly that nothing else will grow in with it. So that's another one that if you catch it small, you can pull it out. If you catch it big, cut it as close to the ground as you can, and then watch for where it's going to come up planting around it. It's the trick with If you don't want to use chemicals for doing invasive control, which I don't recommend unless you have like acres of it, it's to, again, eternal vigilance, smother and get after it as often as you can to reduce the energy in the root system to weaken the plant. And when you do pull it out, make sure that you cover the ground back up so that seed beds are not that are disturbed do not have the light to germinate. Okay. So here's another field trip to show you what burning bush looks like when it's grown. I'm sure you all would recognize it in the fall when it's its brilliant red color. But in the spring, as the leaves are coming out, it has these little red things underneath where the leaves are coming out. And if you get very close to the branches, you can still see a little bit of the forewing areas. Now, the wings sometimes are not as prominent in some plants as they are in others, but there's always something there that looks like a stripe along the four corners of the branches. So I will just turn and you can see this entire row. It actually goes all the way down to the corner of our road and on the four corners. And the other problem with burning bush is that it actually changes the soil composition underneath it as it grows into a large bush, so that the native things that would come back into the area under most invasives have a much harder time doing so. So it's always good to remove burning bush, even if you just take it down to the stump, down to the roots. Through the miracle of modern technology, I'm here on a field trip so that I can show you some more invasive species. This one is the autumn olive, known in my world as the glitterberry, because in the fall, this silvery leafed plant, which is very graceful, is completely covered with bright red berries with little gold specks on them. And they are quite delicious in jam. But they were brought over originally because they fix nitrogen, and they thought they would be good for erosion control and wildlife food. And they turned out that they will completely overtake any open area that is abandoned for more than a year or two. So what you can see is that they have small leaves. The bark is fairly plain, but as it gets older, it gets these little spots on it. And like I say, the underside of the leaves is very silvery, so the trees actually glisten in the wind when they're blowing. And you can see that right now, here at the end of April, it is getting ready to flower, just like the barberry. So this one is one that if you cut it, you can kill it, but you need to watch for years afterwards, because the seeds are viable for almost 10 years after they fall on the ground. So welcome. So I'm glad you saw all of my invasives in my yard and my friends here. And I just want to encourage everybody to go out, learn more about invasives. You can go to the Town of Madison Conservation Commission website. There is some awesome information that was put together by some interns for us last summer. Make sure you gear up properly. Find some gloves that you can work in that are thick enough, especially if you're working with the barberry or the multiflora rose, because you're going to want to have something that the thorns can't go through. Make sure that you make sure the plant is dead. Don't just throw it on the ground. And if you catch it before it flowers, you can put it in your compost, but once it's flowered and set seeds, you don't want to put it in your compost bin. And help us make the world more New Englandy by getting rid of some of the things that don't belong here. Thanks very much, and have a great day.